siege at New Norfolk, a reckoning in shadows. Defiance amidst the black-gloved storm. Prelude, the encirclement. In the quiet hours of a storm-lashed night, the small house in New Norfolk stands alone, its windows aglow against a world suddenly crawling with menace. Black-clad figures move in the darkness, their intentions razor-sharp, every movement signaling the end of mercy. They converge on the homestead, boots crunching on gravel, rifles and sidearms trained with ruthless focus. The air is heavy, electrified by the promise of violence. Somewhere, a distant thunder rolls, echoing the tension within. The stand. Inside, a man stands guard, a guardian sculpted by desperation, with resolve shining in his eyes. He is not alone. The woman he loves crouches behind him, her breath trembling in the hush between gunshots. The siege has transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. A kitchen sink now cradles a shotgun, while a homemade pipe bomb lies ominous on the tile, ready as a last resort. Bullets shatter silence, splintering wood and glass. Men in black fire at the shadowed corners, searching for weakness in the battered defenses. Each shot fired is a question. How long can hope withstand the onslaught? Yet the man remains, defending his sanctuary with every ounce of courage, shielding his beloved from the chaos erupting beyond the walls. The window. Moonlight spills through the curtain, painting pale shapes on the floor. From the window, the outside world is a tableau of fear and fury, gun barrels glinting, bodies shifting with lethal precision. The woman watches, heart pounding, as her defender maneuvers between cover and exposure, every movement a testament to devotion and grit. The seconds stretch, each one echoing with the staccato of gunfire and the low, urgent voices of those who would destroy. But inside the house, a different kind of power grows, the fierce determination to resist, to shield love from the darkness outside, to endure no matter the odds. The reckoning. A hail of shots erupts around the black spot, a place where hope might flicker out, yet somehow remains unbroken. The man answers with his own thunder, the shotgun roaring from the sink's edge, smoke and fire mixing in the swirling air. The pipe bomb waits, a silent sentinel, daring those outside to breach the fragile line. In the crucible of siege, heroism and vulnerability intertwine. Every heartbeat is borrowed time. Every glance between the man and his beloved speaks volumes of unspoken vows. The night is relentless, but so too is the will to survive. Coda, the morning after. When dawn breaks, the echoes of violence hang heavy in the air. The siege may have scarred the walls and shaken the spirit, but inside, defiance has not faltered. In New Norfolk, a man's love became a fortress, and every shadow cast by the men in black was met with light from within, a promise that, no matter how dark the night, courage can outlast the storm. Even as the morning light reveals the wreckage, the splintered door, the shattered panes, the stains of battle, there is a hush, heavy and sacred, lingering between the survivors. In the cool dawn, the man and woman emerge slowly from their shelter, eyes adjusting to the new day, limbs trembling with exhaustion and relief. Outside, the grass glimmers with dew and broken glass, the world unchanged yet irrevocably altered. Neighbors gather in cautious silence, drawn by the aftermath, their faces marked by worry and awe. In the midst of ruin, there is a fragile, collective breath, an acknowledgement of all that was risked and all that was preserved. The pair move through their home, fingers brushing the wounds in the plaster, the places where bullets sought to claim more than flesh. Each scar is testimony. Here, love proved unyielding. Coffee simmers on the hob, its aroma mingling with the ghosts of powder and smoke. The woman sits at the table, her gaze lingering on the man's profile in the golden light. There is nothing gentle about the world outside, but within these battered walls, the ordinary rituals begin again. A cup shared, a gentle touch, a whispered hope. Memory will not soon fade, but neither will the promise forged in fire. Slowly, life returns. The birds dare their songs, children chase the retreating shadows. The siege is now a story, carried quietly in the marrow of those who endured. The man and woman, survivors of the longest night, step into the sun-dappled day. Their home, marked and mended, stands as proof. Even when the storm rages, even when the darkness gathers, love can be the last thing standing. Emerging from the battered doorway, the man surveys the world remade by violence and resolve. Shards of glass glitter in the dawn like 1,000 unshed tears, while the acrid tang of gunpowder clings to the air, a bitter perfume of survival. The woman steps forward, her hand finding his, their fingers entwining with the quiet certainty of those who have weathered a storm together. Outside, the men in black withdraw, their shadows receding from the walls they failed to conquer. The siege is over, but the aftermath hums with questions and consequence. Neighbors, drawn by rumor and distant thunder, gather at the edge of the yard, their faces a mosaic of concern and awe. News of the night's defiance will ripple through New Norfolk, transforming legend into a whispered truth. Here, love held its ground against terror. Inside, the kitchen is a gallery of scars, a splintered cabinet, a scorched countertop, the faint outline where moonlight once danced. Yet in the ruin, something precious thrives, the bond forged not in comfort, but in adversity. The couple moves through their home, gathering remnants of the siege and mourning what was lost, even as they cling to what remains. As sunlight warms the wounded walls, hope stirs, fragile but persistent. The world outside may remain unpredictable, but within these rooms, resilience blossoms. And though the memory of gunfire may never fade, it is joined now by a quieter anthem, the heartbeat of two souls, steadfast and unbroken, awaiting whatever dawn may bring. As midday approaches, sunlight sifts through the fractured windows, illuminating the dust that drifts lazily in the air, a silent testament to all that has been unsettled. The couple cleans in tandem, their movements deliberate, the rhythm of sweeping and scrubbing a quiet reclamation of normalcy. Each scrape of broom against floorboards, each pane of glass carefully gathered, carries a prayer. May peace take root where fear once blossomed. The telephone rings, startling in the stillness, its shrill cry a reminder that the world beyond their battered walls has not paused for breath. Friends and family speak in hushed tones, their voices thin with worry, thick with relief. Offers of help trickle in. Yet, the couple knows that some wounds are best tended in the silence of shared experience, where words fall short and only presence suffices. Outside, the day wears on, and children's laughter, hesitant at first, returns to the street. Lawmen patrol the periphery, their uniforms a fresh kind of shadow, but their presence is no longer a threat. Instead, they are witnesses to resilience, guardians of a fragile calm. The neighbors, emboldened by sunlight and the promise of safety, bring food and blankets. Loaves of bread, jars of preserves, hands clasped in gratitude, small acts weaving the torn fabric of community. In the evening, as the horizon blushes rose and gold, the woman lights a single candle and sets it by the window, its flame flickering in the gathering dusk. The man watches her, admiration and exhaustion mingling in his gaze. Around them, the house exhales, the sigh of settling beams, the faint whir of an old clock, the quiet assurance that, for now, they are safe. They eat together in the gentling dark, the ordinary act of sharing a meal transformed into a Thanksgiving. Later, they sit close, knees touching, listening to the hush that follows catastrophe, the rare quiet when the world, stripped bare, offers only what is essential. In that stillness, they find not answers but solace, a certainty that love, having withstood the siege, remains unconquered. Night comes again, gentle this time. Sleep arrives slowly, tentative, like a stray cat at the door. Yet, even as they drift into dreams, the memory of terror lingers, a shadow at the edge of peace, a lesson inked into their bones. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight, beneath a roof both broken and whole, they rest in the knowledge that together, they have weathered the worst the world could summon, and that, against all odds, they remain. After the siege, the shadows of decision. Lit together, and 3 days' endless chorus of shots, fractured negotiations, and the relentless ticking of dread. Exhaustion had sculpted the hours into jagged fragments, each one heavy with consequence. In the dim light of the third night, The girl lay motionless on the floor, her breath barely stirring the dust. The threat, the bomb, loomed like a final question, brittle and unforgiving. I knelt by her side, the cold weight of failure pressing against my ribs. My resolve faltered. Somewhere between desperation and surrender, the words tumbled out. She was my hostage, not my accomplice. The admission was both shield and confession, a line scrawled against chaos. But with surrender came relief, not for myself, but for her. The violence receded, its echo lingering in the marrow of the house. Lawmen swept through with caution and gravity, neutralizing fear, gathering fragments of evidence and hope. The world outside, having held its breath for 3 long days, exhaled slowly, uncertainty giving way to tentative compassion. Neighbors drifted closer, their eyes searching for the shape of truth in the wreckage. Stories would rise and ripple, some sharp, some softened by time. Yet, in the aftermath, no legend could capture the private ache of regret, the quiet gratitude for a life reclaimed. In the stillness that followed, I found her hand worn, trembling, but alive. The bomb was a memory now, a shadow in the corner of the room. The siege had transformed us not into heroes, but survivors, battered, humbled, and stitched together by the fragile thread of another chance. As dusk descended and the wind curled through the fractured panes, a single candle burned against the night, the silent promise that love, even when battered by storm and haunted by failure, endures. 7 tactical devices had been deployed in swift, merciless succession, each one designed to unmake certainty and scatter resistance. But it was the flashbang that split my world apart, a detonation of light so blistering, so absolute. My senses reeled, and for a moment I believed I had stepped beyond life itself. The muscle and menace of clay balls and bean bags, the crackling threat of tasers, all faded to insignificance beside that instant of blinding white. After the light had burned its mark behind my eyes, black smoke rolled in a choking shroud that brought me to my knees, hands twisted behind my back, the cold bite of cuffs closing like iron promises. Somewhere above me, a voice, sharp-edged, triumphant, proclaimed, "We got you now," as if victory were something that could be pocketed and displayed. The blows that followed were methodical, knuckled gloves meeting flesh with practiced certainty, each strike a punctuation mark in the sentence of defeat. The room spun, punctuated by the ghostly echo of the flash, the memory of its brightness lingering even as darkness closed in. I tasted blood and felt the weight of the moment settle, heavy and inescapable. Yet, even as control slipped from my grasp, I clung to the shreds of resolve left in me, a silent vow that, however battered I became, my spirit would not be erased. These were the tactics of force, brute and dazzling, but within the storm, I found a strange clarity. Survival meant remembering not only the pain inflicted, but the self that endured it. When silence finally spilled back into the room, it felt less like peace and more like a hollowing out. Sounds became distant, the low radio static of officers coordinating outside, the metallic clatter of evidence bags, the uncertain shuffling of feet. My own breathing seemed alien in my ears, ragged and loud over the hush. I watched dust swirl in the air, illuminated briefly by the swinging beam of a flashlight. I wondered what story they would tell in the days to come, whether the world would remember the siege for its violence, or for the mercy that flickered, briefly, before the end. Would anyone recall the moment I lifted my hands, not as a plea, but as a final act of responsibility? Or would the headlines reduce us to silhouettes, all nuance burned away by that single, blinding flash? The girl's silhouette hovered on the edge of my vision, a tremor of hope against the backdrop of chaos. She was safe now, pulled from the jaws of a future neither of us could have survived. The house, once a fortress of dread, now felt small and emptied, its horrors leached out by the slow, methodical work of those who wore badges and carried shields. Eventually, the officers led me out, past neighbors whose faces glimmered like ghosts in the blue wash of police lights. Some mouths moved in silent judgment, others simply stared, hollow-eyed, uncertain. Above it all, the candlelight still flickered in the window, a tiny, defiant heart beating in the darkness, promising that even the most shattered places could cradle the seeds of forgiveness. Outside, the air pressed cool against my bruised skin. Every breath ached, but every breath was also a beginning. I did not know what redemption would look like, or if the world would offer it. But as I was ushered toward the waiting cars, I turned once more to the house, its windows fractured, its story unfinished, and felt, not hope, but the possibility of hope, keen and insistent, threading through the ruins. In the wake of it all, a hush lingered, a strange, weightless pause that felt both unnatural and inevitable. Each footstep down the porch steps echoed with the memory of barricaded hours, of whispered plans and impossible bargains made in the dark. I could taste the city's night air, rain heavy and metallic, tinged with the scent of cordite and scorched insulation. The world outside had continued turning, heedless of our private calamity, and now its reality pressed in with a kind of indifferent mercy. As I was guided toward the waiting cruiser, I caught sight of my own reflection in its window, a face bruised and unfamiliar, eyes hollow but fiercely alive. It struck me then survival was not a tidy thing. It did not erase wounds or restore what violence ripped away. It merely insisted on itself, one ragged breath at a time. Inside the ambulance, the silence was broken only by the squawk of radios and the low hum of the engine. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, watching the candle's glow dwindle behind me, swallowed at last by the city's neon and gloom. Somewhere, the girl would be swaddled in a blanket, offered gentle words that could not blunt the memory, but perhaps might anchor her to hope. As the cruiser rolled into the deeper folds of night, the boundaries of what had been and what might be blurred. I felt, for a fleeting moment, the possibility of forgiveness, thin as the candle's flame, persistent as breath. The siege had ended, but the reckoning would come later, in the slow unraveling of memory, in the faces that would haunt my dreams, in the long, uncertain work of piecing together a life from the fragments left behind. Yet, somewhere within that brokenness, I recognized the stubborn heartbeat of possibility. Even in defeat, I had chosen, however imperfectly, mercy over surrender, love over ruin. And that, I hoped, would be enough to begin again when morning finally came. Later, the world shrank to the geometry of cell bars and fluorescent buzz. Days bled into each other in the sterile corridors of Risdon Prison, each hour marked by the clatter of keys and the distant, wordless murmur of inmates caged in their own regrets. I drank the thin, metallic air and waited, sometimes for sleep, sometimes for nothing, always with the knowledge that the reckoning had only shifted its stage. On the morning the inspector came, the guard's boots rang sharp along the concrete, echoing through the hush that had become my companion. I was led down the corridor, past faces pressed like pale coins against reinforced glass. Some glared, some looked away. The room where they left me was clinical, washed in the colorless light of early day, a battered table between two chairs. The inspector sat already waiting, jacket draped over the backrest, pen poised, eyes unreadable. He did not offer a greeting, only regarded me with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. There was a folder on the table, my name, my history, the accusations pressed flat between thin sheets of paper. The words blunt force trauma hung heavy in the silence, an accusation and a grim diagnosis all at once. I saw my own hands, rested quietly on the table, and wondered how violence could seem so ordinary, how it could reside so comfortably in the spaces between one life and the next. The inspector's questions were measured, his voice scraping at the edges of memory I'd tried to bury. I spoke little, each answer a careful stone placed atop the last, hoping to build some structure that could hold the weight of what I'd done, or failed to prevent. Outside the small window, a square of morning glimmered, indifferent and unreachable. As the interview drew on, the room seemed to contract, the air thickening around us. There was pity in the inspector's eyes, but it was a distant thing, impersonal, as if you were watching someone drown from the safety of the shore. When he finally closed the folder, I felt the relief of reprieve, but also the ache of old wounds, raw and unfinished. Back in my cell, I let the silence settle once more, heavy and immutable. Somewhere in the labyrinth of the prison, rumors would already be taking root, twisting into stories I could neither shape nor escape. I stared at my bruised hands, at the pale scars ribboning my knuckles, and remembered the candle's flame, the promise, however fragile, that even in the darkest rooms, there might yet be space for forgiveness. The world had narrowed, but within that narrowness, some stubborn, flickering hope remained. The man whose death had been plotted against me was an outrage, not for who he was, but for what his absence implied. The rumors painted him as a villain, but I remembered only his stumbling gait, the sour tang of whiskey on his breath, the way failure seemed to settle about his shoulders like a leaden cloak. He was a drunk, a felled, broken thing, and it was his head, his life, cast on the scales against mine. It was easy, in the hush of my cell, to wonder how the world could be so eager to assign blame, how violence could shape not just the present, but every shadow that reached into the future. I knew the stories twisting through the corridors, voices sharpening the edges of truth, rendering a man into a symbol of outrage, of disgrace, of something to be revenged. Yet behind every accusation was a pulse, a history, a ruin that no courtroom could fully hold. And so I waited, battered by memory and rumor alike, hoping that the reckoning would one day settle on something softer than vengeance, a verdict shaped by mercy, not outrage, by the stubborn urge to see people as more than the sum of their failings. The verdict came with the hush of inevitability, the gavel's echo reverberating somewhere deeper than the bone. The court found me guilty, not of murder, but of the siege, as though my choices had merely triggered a storm and stood back to watch it rage. The headlines would never mention the nuance, only the spectacle. The death that had stained my waking hours was severed from my name by technicalities that weighed little against the lives appended, but to me, the sentence carried its own private ballast. Worse, though, was the sentence handed to my love. 8.5 years, a half decade measured out in the stifling increments of concrete and loss. I remembered the night we whispered plans through trembling lips, promises woven in the dark, and how the world had split along the fault lines of loyalty and fear. Now, that same world offered its judgment, not just on what we had done, but on what we had dared to feel in the shadow of the law. I replayed the moment our eyes met across the courtroom, a silent confession passing between us. 5 years. 5 years in which hope would be rationed and memories would grow thin as paper, but I clung to the stubborn belief that when the doors finally opened, we might yet find our way back, scarred, yes, but not broken beyond repair. The prison world pressed in closer as news trickled through, the rumors morphing into certainties, the stories calcifying into legend. Yet beneath it all, I carried the quiet knowledge of what the court could not see, the weight of love, the price of mercy, and the faint, defiant glimmer that survives even in the ruins of judgment. The days slid past, indistinguishable but for the small rituals that tethered them together, the metallic rattle of keys, the thin gruel ladled into bowls, the shuffling procession of prisoners through corridors mottled with old sunlight. Each sunrise was a measured thing, filtered through wire and glass, and I found myself counting shadows, marking time in the slow arc they traced across the concrete floor. At night, the world shrank even further, pressed tight against memory's bruised edge. Sleep came in shallow increments, interrupted by distant shouts and the hollow clang of a gate closing somewhere down the maze. I would lie awake, tracing the ridges of my scars, listening for that phantom sound, a breath, a whisper, a footfall that belonged to another life. Sometimes I wrote letters I would never send, shaping words for the one whose sentence ran parallel to mine. I told them of the way the morning light caught the dust in the air, of dreams where we walked free, hand in hand, beneath trees heavy with the promise of spring. I wrote of regret, but also of the gentleness I refused to let the walls erase, as if the act of writing could stitch together something durable from longing and loss. There were moments when mercy seemed impossibly far, when the old ache of blame gnawed at the edges of resolve. Yet even then, in the hush before dawn, I held on to the thought that forgiveness, like hope, could be a kind of rebellion. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to the slow labor of grace. Inside, I learned to bear the weight of solitude, to listen for the subtle shifts in silence where memory and desire still spoke, quietly, of all that might endure. Outside these walls, my family's voices echoed in ways the cell never could. I heard them as if down a long corridor of years, sharp with betrayal, dulled by age, repeating the verdict the world had handed me. Let him rot for what he's done. Let him fade into the gray. They marked me an outcast, a criminal scum who picked a fight with the law and lost, and there was a twisted kind of relief in the certainty of their anger. They wanted nothing more to do with me, and I became, in their eyes, less a person than a stain, evidence of the world's cruelty retold at family tables now grown cold. Yet, even in exile, I could not unclasp myself from memory. The cruel words hurt less than the loss of the small, ordinary kindnesses, the warm hand on a shoulder, the knowing glance at a shared joke, the sense of belonging that once seemed unbreakable. I held their anger at arm's length, tried to see it for what it was, a way to carve out distance from pain, to build a bulwark against the shame that seeped through every headline and judgment. Perhaps, in their own way, they needed to believe I was lost, that I deserved the cell, the silence, the sentence. It made the world less confusing, less gray. Still, I wondered, in the quietest moments, if their hearts ever faltered, if, beneath all the bitterness, some flicker of the old connection survived, as stubborn as a weed between stones. I wondered if forgiveness was only ever possible when we let ourselves see each other not as monsters or martyrs, but as people, battered by choices and circumstance, longing for absolution no courtroom could provide. But the world rarely waits for such reckonings. It moves on, swift and merciless, while those of us left behind learn to stitch our own solace from the scraps of memory and the hope, however slim, that time can make room for something softer than scorn. Some nights, in the faint glow that bled through the window's bars, I traced the geography of forgiveness on the uneven surface of my life, mapping out the places where grace had once grown wild and unchecked before the world's sharp edges trimmed it back. I thought of the one whose eyes had met mine in that courtroom and wondered how they weathered the passing seasons, whether the years wore down their anger or pressed it into something hard and shining. I tried to imagine reunion, not as a grand triumph or sudden absolution, but as a quiet, tentative reaching, a hesitant hand extended across the divide, trembling between memory and possibility. Would we still know each other in the light of freedom, having carried the shape of longing through all these years? Or would we stumble and retreat, uncertain how to bridge the gap left by time and hurt? In these hours, hope was not a banner unfurled, but a murmur beneath my ribs, persistent as breath. It whispered of gardens left untended, of rain falling on cracked earth, of green shoots pushing up against all odds. If love could survive the famine of days, if mercy could outlast judgment, perhaps there waited a place for us, somewhere beyond the reach of prison walls and family verdicts. Until then, I gathered every flicker of gentleness, every echo of laughter lingering from before, and wove them into the fabric of my days. I learned to greet each morning with a wary gratitude, to honor the fragile beauty in small mercies, a nod from another inmate, the unlikely gift of silence, the softness in my own voice when I dared to speak kindness aloud. This, I decided, would be my rebellion, a life not defined by the boundaries of my cell, but by the refusal to surrender what goodness remained. And if, someday, the world should turn and look my way, not with pity or disdain, but with the plain acknowledgement of our shared frailty, I would be ready, holding out the fragile things I'd managed to salvage, the hope that bends but does not break, the love that endures in secret, and the forgiveness that waits, patient and unclaimed, for its place in the sun. Even she, the one whose light I once thought would guide me through any storm, turned away to save herself. I cannot blame her. Her freedom dangled before her like an impossible fruit, and all she had to do was say what they wanted to hear. There are stories, louder and stranger each time they reach my ears, of the things she confessed and the new shapes her life has taken, that she's found solace in the arms of another, that she's turned away from the love we knew. Some say she did it for her mother,